Welcome, viewer. This is our program, Knowledge Quest, subject, Biology. I'm your teacher, Lydia Asiago from Karura Adventist School. Last lesson, we were learning about respiration, and we were able to define the word respiration. We were able to define some other terms like respiratory quotient, whereby we said it's just a ratio showing the relationship between the amount of carbon dioxide produced to the amount of oxygen used during respiration. I also remember we said that when we calculate the RQ, it is easy for us to determine the type of the substrate that is being oxidized. We said if you oxidize glucose, then your RQ, you calculate, you get it is 1. If you oxidize the fats, we said the RQ for fats is 0.7. If you oxidize the proteins, we said if you oxidize the proteins, then the RQ is 0.9. So we were able to give the role of respiration and the role of calculating the RQ. We said when we calculate RQ, it helps us to know the type of the food substrate that is being oxidized. And number 2, we said RQ will help you determine the type of respiration taking place, if it is either aerobic respiration or anaerobic respiration. Now, we want to proceed to today's lesson. We want to look at the difference between aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Now, of course, you are able to define aerobic respiration. So we have aerobic respiration, and we also have anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration. So we want to see what are the differences between the two types of respiration. Of course, the first difference, we said that during aerobic respiration, oxygen is used. So we say oxygen is used during aerobic respiration. Then we also said, of course, anaerobic respiration means that oxygen is not used. So oxygen not used. So that is just one difference between aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. The second difference, we said that if you completely break down one molecule of a food substrate, you get high amount of energy during aerobic respiration. So here we have high amount of energy. High amount of energy is produced as compared to when you break down one molecule of glucose. So in this case, we produce low amount of energy. Low amount of energy produced. So that is just another difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. We are saying that, especially if you break down glucose, we say that if you break down one molecule of glucose, then you are going to get 17 kilojoules of energy. Then, of course, if you don't break it completely, of course, you expect to have low amount of energy. Then, when we talk about another difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration, we realize that during aerobic respiration, we produce water So we say water is produced. Water is one of the substances that is produced. So we say water is produced during aerobic respiration. During anaerobic respiration, there is no water. There is no water produced. Here we don't have water being produced. Then the fourth difference that we can give between aerobic and anaerobic respiration, you realize that during aerobic respiration, the food substrate is completely oxidized. So the food substance, so there is complete, we say there is complete oxidation. There is complete oxidation of food into, we said there are three products when we have complete oxidation of food into, we have carbon 4 oxide, we have water, and we also have energy in form of ATP. So that is when you completely oxidize glucose. But on the other side, you realize that during anaerobic respiration, glucose or any food substrate is not completely broken down. And because of that, you get some other products. Like now, we say there is incomplete, so we say there is incomplete oxidation. We have incomplete oxidation of food substances. And because of this, the products that you form in plants, so like now you produce what? We have, so there is production of lactic acid. Lactic acid, this is in animals. Then we also have production of alcohol. So we are producing alcohol in plants. So you see the products that are formed are different when you compare aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. So those are just some of the differences we can give between aerobic and anaerobic. We have so many other differences. So you will find out which are the other differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Now we want to move to our last part of respiration. Now when we have accumulation of alcohol, when there is anaerobic respiration, what happens? Alcohol is produced, and especially in plants. So when you have accumulation of alcohol, you form something else. It is very important that we mention that during anaerobic respiration, you realize that there is accumulation of alcohol. There is accumulation of alcohol, and because of that, we usually say what is happening is fermentation. We have fermentation. So when you talk about fermentation, it means there is a lot of alcohol that is being produced. And because of this, we want to see some of the applications of anaerobic respiration. So we want to mention few applications. Where can we apply the concept of fermentation? Where can we apply the concept of anaerobic respiration? So you want to see the applications of anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration. I want to believe that you've come across this. We can apply anaerobic respiration in so many fields. Like now, if you go to the industries, in the bakery industry, what happens in the bakery industry? What happens in the bakery industry? That is the concept of anaerobic respiration. Now, you see when they are making bread, they add the yeast. What happens? Of course, we expect the yeast to undergo respiration. The yeast breaks down the sugars that is added during baking of bread. So what happens when the yeast breaks down the sugars? It produces carbon 4 oxide. And of course, that carbon 4 oxide is the one that makes the dough to swell, to raise up. So because of that, we say anaerobic respiration is very important. We can use it in bakery industry, that is in baking industry. Number 2, we can use anaerobic respiration in brewery industry. Brewery industry. We can also use this one in production of fermented drinks. We have fermented drinks like yogurt. We can also have, so there are so many areas where we can apply anaerobic respiration. Products like yogurt, where do we get them from? It's all about fermentation. So we are going, you need to find out where else can we use this concept of anaerobic respiration. It is very crucial in our industry area, and that's why we need to learn more in anaerobic respiration. Of course, when we'll be learning another topic in classification, we'll still learn more on what happens during anaerobic respiration. For now, we want to see few examples. We want to see few examples of questions. You know, as a student, at times we learn to read, then we cram the textbook. But the concept is, when someone asks you a question, you must have had the knowledge, so you should be able to respond to the question based on what you've learned. Like now, if I give you such a setup, I'm going to draw a setup, and in this setup, I'm going to ask you some few questions just to test what have you learned. Is there any way that we can ask these questions? It's not always that we are going to ask what is respiration, what are the types of respiration. You know, we can also have application questions, but still testing the same idea of what we've learned. Assume I have seeds here. So these are seeds, and then I assume I do that setup. Then in this, the second setup, still the same, but now I'm going to have something that has happened. Then I have this one. And of course, what have I placed inside here? This is potassium hydroxide. Potassium hydroxide, I can use potassium hydroxide, I can use sodium hydroxide. So I'm using potassium hydroxide, or I can use sodium hydroxide. So this is a solution of potassium hydroxide. Then inside here, I have seeds. So these are germinating seeds. These are germinating seeds. Then, this is at the beginning of the experiment. So at the beginning. Then here, I have at the end. So at the end, something happens. Something happens here. Then I ask you, what is the aim of this setup? What is the aim of this setup? I have germinating seeds. I've placed them in this, let me call it a flask of that shape. Then I have sodium hydroxide or potassium. So in this case, I can use sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide. So any of the two can do the same role. Then I ask you, what is the aim of this experiment? As a wise student, you should start thinking of what is really happening. If I look keenly, the level of sodium hydroxide, maybe in this flask, I can check the level. But on the other side, the level has risen up. What do you think has happened? The level has increased on the other side. It means something is happening. Now, when the seeds are germinating, what happens? They undergo respiration. And when they undergo respiration, I want to believe in the seeds we have food that is stored in form of starch. But now the starch is being oxidized into glucose. So I want to believe that glucose is being oxidized, of course, in presence of oxygen. I want to believe inside here we have what? Air. And air contains oxygen. So I want to believe we have what? Oxygen. And then at the end of this, I expect to have 3 products. I have 3 products. I have carbon 4 oxide, carbon 4 oxide. I have water, and then I have energy in form of ATP. What do you think is the aim of this experiment? Remember here we are not testing temperature. We are not testing the amount of water. So what happens really in this experiment? You realize that, number one, the seeds are undergoing respiration. So they use the oxygen that is initially in the air. And of course, if they use the oxygen, I want to believe they are releasing carbon 4 oxide. But you see the carbon 4 oxide, if anytime you talk about sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide, what do? They absorb carbon 4 oxide. So what happens? So sodium hydroxide, the sodium hydroxide will do what? Will absorb, so this one absorbs the carbon 4 oxide. So at the end of it, the amount of air that you add inside this flask has reduced by removing the oxygen. Of course, we expect to replace the amount of air used by releasing carbon 4 oxide, but now carbon 4 oxide is being absorbed here. So what happens? You create a vacuum. So inside here, you create a vacuum. And as a result, you do what? When you compare inside this flask and outside, you realize that outside there is a higher atmospheric pressure. So the higher atmospheric pressure is the one that will push the sodium hydroxide into the flask. And that's why we are seeing the level of sodium hydroxide increasing from the initial to the end of the experiment. The level is increasing up the what? Up the flask. So this is just an example of an application question that you can be asked in the topic of respiration. There are so many other application questions. So we don't only read and you cram the answer. You need to read, understand, so that if you are asked a question, you should be able to apply the concept that you learned. We are going for a short break. Remember, this is our program, Knowledge Quest. Stay tuned. Welcome back, our viewer. We were on the Knowledge Quest program. The subject is biology. We've been learning about respiration as one of the characteristics of living organisms. We want to move on to another characteristic that is very crucial in living organisms. And that characteristic is excretion. So when we talk about excretion, we are going to define the word excretion. At the same time, we are going to combine it with another essential feature that we call homeostasis. So we are going to learn about excretion and homeostasis. That is the next topic we are going to learn in this series. Now, when we talk about excretion, of course, when we were giving the introduction, we said excretion is a process whereby living organisms, they separate and eliminate the waste products that are formed during metabolic processes. I'm going to repeat the definition. What do we mean by, number one, excretion? And I'm saying that excretion is a process whereby living organisms, they separate and eliminate the waste products that are produced during metabolic processes. And these waste products, of course, they are produced within the cells. So we have to eliminate them outside from the body. Then we ask ourselves, when we talk about excretion, there are other terms that usually students confuse between excretion and those terms. So I'm going to write them. So when you talk about excretion, some students confuse secretion. So we have secretion. We also have another term we call egestion. And we also have another term we call ingestion. So these are just terms that we need to be keen when we define them. If I start with the first one, I've said excretion is the process whereby living organisms, they separate and eliminate the waste products that are formed from their metabolic processes. So they are eliminated from the body. That is excretion. When we talk about secretion, secretion is the release of useful substances from the body cells. An example of a useful substance that can be secreted by the body is mucus. So we cannot say mucus is a what? Is a waste product? No, it is because mucus is useful. Yes, it is secreted, but it is useful. Another example of the useful substances that are secreted by the body cells, we have milk. So milk is an example of a secretion. When we also have another example, we can talk about saliva. Saliva is secreted. So those are useful substances that are being released by the body cells. So when we talk about secretion, we should not confuse it with excretion. Excretion, we said, waste products. So in this case, we are interested with wastes. Waste products. And the examples of waste products that we can have, e.g. carbon dioxide is a waste product, especially in animals. We can have lactic acid, that is a waste product, and so on. So we are going to discuss more on the waste products that we excrete. Then when we talk about egestion, what do we mean by egestion? Egestion is the removal of undigested or indigested food substances from the alimentary canal of animals. Egestion is the removal of undigested or indigestible food substances from the alimentary canal of what? Of organisms. And then when we talk about ingestion, this is just introduction of food substances into our digestive system. So when you introduce food into your mouth, that is ingestion. So you can see these are terms that are related, but they totally mean different. They have different meanings. Now, I want to pick on excretion and homeostasis. I also need to define the word homeostasis. Now, what do we mean by homeostasis? Homeostasis means maintenance of a constant environment. So when I define homeostasis, it means maintenance of a constant environment despite the external fluctuations. Why should we have a constant environment? Of course, it's for proper functioning of the cells. So those are just definitions. So we'll pick one. So we'll start with excretion. Once we are done with excretion, then we'll move on to homeostasis. Now, the question is, what is this that is excreted? Of course, we expect the excretory products in plants to be different from the excretory products in animals. So, excretion, we are excreting what? Excess. Excretion, we are removing, we are separating and removing waste products. So, which are these examples of waste products? So, which are these examples of waste products that we are eliminating from the body? Number one, you can talk about carbon dioxide. So, carbon dioxide can be eliminated by both plants and animals. We are going to see that. Then we can talk about lactic acid. Lactic acid is a what? Is a waste product. Is a waste product. You can talk about, in plants, you can talk about tannins, resins. All those are what? Waste products. Even in plants, we can also have oxygen as a waste product. We also have nitrogenous waste. We have nitrogenous wastes, e.g., whereby we have urea, we have ammonia. These are all examples of nitrogenous waste. We have uric acid, and so on. So those are just examples of waste products that are eliminated during excretion. The question is, why do we need excretion? Why do we need excretion? Look at the waste products. Take an example of lactic acid. What do you think will happen if we leave the lactic acid to accumulate in the body cells? Definitely, we are going to destroy the functioning, we are going to destroy the cell and even the functioning of the cell. So if we leave the waste products to accumulate within the cells, then we say they become toxic to the cells. And because of that, we need excretion. We need to separate them. And then we eliminate them from the body. And that's why we are going to discuss excretion both in plants and in animals. So let's start with excretion in plants. We start with excretion in plants. Of course, if you look at the plants, they don't have an excretory system like in animals, sorry. So we want to look at excretion in plants. Now, when we talk about excretion in plants, what do you think is this that we are excreting in plants? Of course, I want to believe there are so many metabolic processes that takes place in a plant. For example, during respiration, what happens? What do we have as a waste product? We have oxygen. We have, carbon dioxide. Now, during photosynthesis, we have a waste product like oxygen. So when you check on the excretion in plants, you realize that plants, they have simple excretory waste. They are very simple. They are not that toxic. They are not that complicated. And because of that, we say that plants, they lack an excretory system. We are saying plants, they lack an excretory system. So that's a very major point that we need to note, that plants do not have. So they lack an excretory system. Now, the question is, why do plants lack an excretory system? Of course, there are so many reasons. Reason number one, you look at the main waste products in plants. They only come from the breakdown of carbohydrates. Like their main waste products majorly come from the breakdown of carbohydrates. So waste products like oxygen is not that toxic to the plants. Waste products like carbon dioxide is not that toxic to the plant, because you look at the plants, they need oxygen, they need carbon dioxide. So you realize that the first reason why plants lack an excretory system is that their main waste products come from the breakdown of carbohydrates. Number two, we also say that in plants, some of the waste products are recycled. What do I mean by recycled? They are reused. Like now, during photosynthesis, what happens? We have oxygen as a product, and in that case, it becomes a waste product. So we are producing oxygen. During respiration in plants, we produce carbon dioxide as a waste product. But you see, photosynthesis is a process that requires carbon dioxide as a raw material. So what does that mean? The carbon dioxide that is released from respiration can be used for photosynthesis. While respiration is a process that requires oxygen. So what does that mean? It means that the oxygen that is produced during photosynthesis, it can also be used during respiration. So in a way, we are saying some of the waste products, not all of them, I've said some of the waste products are recycled in the plant. And we have given an example where we have photosynthesis, we have oxygen being given out, used in respiration, and during respiration, we are producing carbon dioxide that is used in photosynthesis. So you see, there is no that concept whereby the waste products are accumulating because some of them are being reused. Then if you also check on the plants, the third reason why we have no excretory system in plants is that you realize some of the waste products can be converted into non-toxic, and then they can be stored in the plant. Some of the waste products, like now when I talk about rubber, we say it is an excretory product. Yes, it's a waste, but it is useful. Why? You find that the plant is able to convert some. I've not said all, but I've said some. So some of the waste products are converted into non-toxic and they are stored in the plant. And because of that, you realize that we don't need an excretory system in plants. So the next question we answer, how does the plant, or which are the methods of excretion in plants? Methods of excretion in plants. We have 5 methods of excretion. So I'm going to list them, then we'll discuss. We have methods of excretion in plants. Number 1, we have transpiration. Number 2, we have guttation. Number 3, we have deposition. Then number 4, so I'm going to discuss them as we list down the processes of methods that plants use for what? For excretion. We also have diffusion. And lastly, we have exudation. These are our 5 methods of excretion in plants, and we are going to discuss them in the next episode. Before we break, I'm giving you an assignment. List 5 excretory products in plants and give the use for each excretory product. I'm going to repeat. Give 5 excretory products in plants and give the use for each excretory products that you've mentioned. You can send your answer to our Facebook channel, Hope Channel Kenya, or to the mobile number on the bottom of your screen. You've been watching the program Knowledge Quest, subject Biology, and I've been your teacher, Madam Lydia Asiago. See you next time.